Welcome back to Cricket Central, the podcast where we discuss all the stories, big and small. We're here for the day 3 recap of the second test between Australia and South Africa. Another action-packed day where South Africa teased us with the potential of an heroic comeback in the match, particularly through another fantastic spell of bowling by Nortje at the start of the day. But in the end, on Boxing Day, it was Cam Green. Yesterday, it was David Warner. But today it was Alex Carey. He drove, pulled, and cut his way to a majestic opening maiden century. The first Australian wicketkeeper to do it since Brad Haddam many years ago, and puts Australia in prime position, 370 runs ahead, and with just 9 wickets to get in 2 days to wrap up this match and wrap up the series, feeding South Africa, hopefully for the first time since 2005-06 summer on home soil. So Ethan Prabs, another fantastic day for the Australians.
Yeah, again, pretty much went precisely to plan. Another couple of great moments in this test, which are well worth remembering. That's one of the great innings from Carey, and it's unusual that you ever can, potentially say that a 100 was better than a 200, but that's certainly up there. He played with class the whole way through. Right from the get-go, he looked solid. The stroke play is unlike anything I've seen from him before, really. And it was largely a chanceless ton, and he just rubbed salt into the wound of this labouring South African innings, and finally it was brought to a close after 145 overs in the field.
Yeah, it really was a fantastic innings. I mean, you would have to say Warner's probably, in terms of the position in the game, there was a bit more life in, a bit more jeopardy early on in his innings. But I agree, just purely on how it looked and sort of the class and ease with which he batted. Alex Carey's innings was unsurpassed. And I think that the thing that stood out, a few people mentioned it, is just the sort of simple approach he has to his batting. You know, he doesn't try too many different shots. He's sort of his good square of the wicket, basically defends all the good balls very well, and sort of similar to Travis Head in a way. He just seems to have a very clear plan of how he's going to go about things.
Yeah, I think it's a very simple technique, and it's because it doesn't have that abnormality. I think there's less weaknesses that are evident for this South African lineup. And as you said, he drove really well today, and he picked the balls that he was going to attack really well as well. I think his strike rate outside off the stump was in the 120s or 130s, and then as he worked into his innings, we saw some of those lovely on drives, and pulls and flicks through mid wicket work their way into the game as well. So it started off just sticking to his strengths with the offside play and being very solid on stumps, and then that margin of error from the bowlers gradually reduced as that innings progressed. And it was very, very hard, really, for them to have even a chance at him. I think he kept everything along the ground very well. And he timed everything exceptionally well as well. So it was an innings of great aesthetics, but also great cricket intelligence from Alex Carey.
Yeah, South Africa were sort of setting the trap in the offside, sort of letting him drive, but actually bowling okay in there to try and get the wicket. But he was just too good in the end. And the question I have for you this summer, I would say the two most entertaining batsmen and sort of the best stroke play coming from the Australian team has come from Travis Head and Alex Carey. And the one thing that they have in common is that they're from the great state of South Australia. So can we say that South Australia produced the most attractive batsmen?
I mean, attractive is an interesting word to put to it. I think certainly you can describe Carey's batting as attractive. I think Head's more so a bit of flamboyance without the necessarily being technically correct and compact. But yeah, certainly I think those two batsmen from South Australia have batted with great intent, which we haven't really consistently seen from anyone else. And it is notable that, those batsmen who speak of are both left-handers. David Warner, the other left-hander, managed 200 in this innings. So I do wonder if the South African attack does have a bit of a weakness against these left-handed batsmen. But certainly the form that Travis Head and Alex Carey are in is pretty much peak from what we've seen from them over the last couple of years. I haven't seen Alex Carey hit shots like I've seen today in any form really, and it was great to see that the freedom that they've come out and batted with, and good for South Australia, sorry, to have a little bit of cricketing, prowess to celebrate, which is, in the last few years been a bit short.
Yeah, well, I'll leave that last comment. But yes, no, it's a good point you make actually about South Africa's bowlers potentially having a weakness against left-handers, because I guess you look at Jansen, his strength would sort of be going across the right-handers. Maharaj obviously being a left-arm finger spinner, sort of similar there. So yeah, it could be something in that. But yeah, overall, I think Australia, we'll discuss it a bit more in a second, but I'm feeling more confident about my prediction that Australia will beat India in India in a couple of months' time. Everything seems to be coming together perfectly here. But first, I will just jump across to South Africa's side of things, because it was another impressive spell in the first session of today. 2 wickets in 2 balls, I think, to get Travis Head and David Warner coming out on the first ball back after retiring hurt. Bit unfortunate there for David Warner, but just for a second there, it looked, you sort of thought, oh, well, Green's injured, Stark's injured. There was still a doubt over whether they would be able to bat. And we were only, I think, probably about 250 to 300 ahead at that time. So you sort of thought maybe South Africa could get back into the match. It was another good spell.
Yeah, particularly from Anrich Nortje, whose personality and pace has really shone through with this test. I think they were doing a bit of player introduction on the commentary, and he said that he was someone in 40-degree heat who prides himself on standing up and leading by example, and that sort of attitude has really shone through this test. Particularly many teams in Australia, when they do have to bowl over a day, and spend, in this case, 145 overs in the field, you do see most players give up. And notably from South Africa, they've lacked attitude and application from Rabada and Gideon Maharaj in particular. But certainly, Anrich Nortje's spells of 4 to 5 overs have, brought great pace, and he always feels like he's in the game. And I think everyone who watched this test probably says that he's deserving to get at least the 3 wickets that he got. That Warner ball was pretty much perfectly executed. Very, very hard to play a Yorker right on the toes for the first ball you get, even when you're on 200. So that was quite a remarkable innings today from David Warner. And certainly the Travis Head ball as well was, well executed ball. I do feel that with his pace, he's probably had the better of David Warner despite this innings. And that's an issue that we've seen with Mark Wood and Warner as well. So, and he's managed to hit and trouble a lot of the Australian attacks. So certainly Anrich Nortje is a big tick from the South Africans. Marco Jansen showed a little bit of promise as well, and he certainly has hit some good areas. So I think, it's an attack that some would have said is the best in the world. And you do see glimpses of that with the sort of spells they've bowled today. And it was good that particularly Nortje was able to stand up and trouble Australia for a bit there with that collapse of 3 for 5 as Head, Warner and Cummins all departed pretty quickly.
We've spoken a bit about their tactics this test also. I thought a little bit better from them today. They seem to bowl a bit straighter, a bit more aggressive. To Cam Green, I don't know. I mean, yeah, anyone could do this to Cam Green sometimes, but they did manage to sort of tie him down for a bit. Do you think they maybe learn a couple of the lessons from the first day and a bit today?
Potentially, I think it can be hard if you spend the whole day in the field for teams to just maintain the application throughout, and maintain the plans or come up with new plans for that matter. I do think they were slightly better today. They probably still did miss a couple of tricks, particularly with Cameron Green. He's someone you can really attack early on, and his strike rate across his 177 balls today was 29, and particularly early on in his innings, he was sort of just holding up an end for Alex Carey. So I was happy actually with the bowling changes that they did make when Nokia came into the attack was at good times. So credit to Elgar for that. But I think there's still more room for some different plans and some potentially different fields, because it did look a little bit too easy for Green and Carey there, and there wasn't a whole lot of chances that the South Africans actually made.
Yeah, well, and perhaps one way of fixing things would be to invest in an analyst. Or what was it you were telling me today, that they don't have a registered team analyst on their squad or something?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was on the Seven coverage actually the other day actually, and they were coming up with, well, they were analysing all the Australian batsmen and saying, oh, the South Africans should be bowling here, and then the commentator said, oh, no doubt the South African analysts will pass this on to the bowlers, and then news emerged that apparently they don't have an analyst at all, so they don't have access to the same data that even the commentary team has, which was quite ironic. And I was thinking that maybe we should, scrap some of this TV coverage because we're giving the South Africans bowling plans, but um, maybe off the back of that, they have different ploys to players like Travis Head, who's got that potential weakness under the armpit that got him strangled out. So, I mean, we often, when bowlers have a particular plan or do strangle someone, attribute it to a plan, but maybe it was a bit of luck from the South Africans in that first test.
Yeah, I find that mind-boggling that they don't have someone at that role. But yeah, anyway, very interesting times. You mentioned Cam Green. He did bring up his sixth Test 50 today, in unconvincing fashion, I guess you would say, off I think 170 balls he brought enough of. So it was really a gutsy innings, I guess you could call it, because he did have an injury. You could tell he was a bit restricted in some of his stroke plays. So good of him to go out there and grind out a 50. But how did you see him today?
I think when people talk about Cameron Green, we've been saying for a while now that he hasn't really figured out how to bat at Test level, and I think that's shone through really these couple of series. I mean, it's a separate point how long you want to give him before it figures it out. But the thing in Shield cricket is you might get that one bad ball and over that you can punish to the fence, and I think here we've seen in this innings him probably be slightly more on the defensive side, and then previously when he hit those 3 4s and nicked off, that was probably too much on the aggressive side. So I think when he applies himself, he's certainly got some very unique stroke play, and you can see the glimpses of talent that he has. But I don't think he's found the right balance between defense and attack yet, which is why some innings are striking at 29 in a real grind, like we saw today, and others are a little bit rash and aggressive, and he seems to fall pretty cheaply playing false shots. So, I mean, I think with anyone who's a fan of Cam Green, seeing him spend time at the crease is always a good thing. I think there were the shots he did play, there were a number of those which I think you'd be very happy with. Certainly, his driving, I'm a big fan of. But yeah, he is probably a batsman that any bowler would like bowling to right now because he seems quite easy to get stuck in little holes at one end. So I think, yeah, a little bit of work needs to be done basically on the gear that he attempts to play the game at, and potentially working that strike rate as well. I think Ponting's highlighted this, and we saw that in the Ashes as well. But generally speaking, when he does strike over 50, he does bat better as well. But yeah, the injury was certainly a factor here. So good on him for sticking it out there with a broken finger and helping Alex Carey to get to his tongue.
Yeah, I mean, Cam Green's forward defense is one of the nicest in the game. I think you can watch that all day just on repeat. It's beautiful. But a point that so I think it was Sean Pollock on the Fox commentary sort of reiterated your point, that he said that something he was told as an all-rounder early in his career is that, batting 6 or 7, you don't really get that much time to make runs and to sort of construct an innings. So you sort of have to be a little bit more aggressive, and that's certainly not the approach Cam Green seems to be taking at the moment in Test cricket. So be interesting to see whether there is some sort of change in the way he goes about things there. But well, just quickly, a couple words in general on Australia. I think there's lots of stories to come out of this test from Australian side, but probably for these last few days and for the whole summer, I think you could probably say that we have a lot of depth in the team at the moment. You think of some of the big summers of over the past couple of years, not so much last year, but sort of the days where Steve Smith was just completely dominating. It was often sort of a 2 or 3 man batting order that we had a lot of the time. But you've had everyone now perform in this series. We know the depth we've got in our bowling lineup. I think you've almost got all our bowlers bowling sort of at almost the best in their career. I would say at the moment. Do you think that we are really in a very good position as a team, and we've got a tough winter coming up? Could we do something special in India and then in England?
Yeah, it's a good point you raised actually, because a lot of these players are really coming into a little bit of form now, or at the peak of their careers. Even in the short start to the summer we've had, I mean, every single one of the batsmen's managed 100 except for Khawaja and Green, and we know the form Khawaja was in last summer. And you're right, it's a bowling attack which I think that there was a graphic showing that they're all averaging under 20 this summer, except for Cam Green, who's averaging 24 and just coming off a fiver. And even the backups with players like Boland and Nisa, maybe even Lance Morris, there's a lot of excitement around players like them. So certainly it looks a very strong team, and there's not really any selection issues on the horizon. I think people have murmured about Warner and Kawaja's spots, but I don't really think Harris or Renshaw are particularly close to this side. So it looks a settled team for me. And I'd be interested to know how they fare away in India and England, which are probably the big challenges of Australian teams in the past. I am still skeptical about our chances, although interestingly, my view's probably flipped now to say we might even have a better chance in India than England, but that's yet
Yeah.
to be seen, really. But I think to our sort of benefit, this Australian team is probably peaking in terms of form, and I think the India team's at one of its lower points. They just managed to scrape past Bangladesh away last week, so I do think if we apply ourselves, we have a decent chance there. And I think it's an Australian lineup where, certainly a batting lineup, where a lot of them are actually quite decent against spin, particularly Khawaja, Smith, Green, and Carey. I all have confidence in them. And England will be I think that's going to be the premium challenge. We've got a pretty poor record away there. That team's probably in the best form they've had in a while as well. But if they do conjure up these flatter wickets, that might actually play into Australia's hands, given our previous struggles against the moving ball. So I think it's an Australian team, as you mentioned, heading in the right direction, almost peaking. A very settled lineup, and I think now is when we actually want to be challenging the big teams away in their own condition.
Yeah, I'm shocked you didn't mention Travis Head as a great player of spin there. No, he's absolutely atrocious. But anyway, apart from
He's
that,
a great bowler of spin.
yes, yeah, that's right. The best all rounder in the team, some would say. Anyway, another thing developing well is Pat Cummins' captaincy. We've seen sort of a more aggression from him. I think it's almost been forgotten that we did make the big move to bowl first in this match, which has paid off spectacularly thus far. But one interesting thing today, you don't need to dwell on it too much, but I mean, when we were 370, around 370, I think, ahead, when Alex Carey got out, it was an interesting move to bring in Mitch Starc, who had an injured finger there. I thought at the time it must just be to get Cam Green his 50, but then Cam Green brought it his 50. Cummins still didn't make the call. Then Mitch Starc got hit on the head, and Cummins still didn't make the call even then, until Starc had been sort of fixing up his helmet for about 5 minutes, and then finally pulled the pin. So I'm not sure what was going on there, to be honest, but maybe just a bit of mind games to try and grind South Africa into the dirt even more, which we always like as Australians. So yeah, perhaps we should be supporting Cummins for that. Anyway, a couple of things to cover off before we do finish. Elgar out again early to Cummins, strangled down the leg side again. And I mean, he looks to have a real weakness against this, Ethan. His head just seems to drop away, bat long way from the body. So yeah, a real concern.
Yeah, I think with someone like Dean Elgar, he's a player you'd probably say you don't associate a good classical technique with him, but he does have the mental grit and toughness. And I think he is getting sort of found out a little bit in these conditions. His record in Australia is actually notoriously quite poor. I think he's averaging below 20. And aside from the 100 he's hit, I don't think he's past 30th outside of that. So he's certainly struggling, and there might be a lot of things playing on his mind with captaincy as well. But yeah, certainly, even despite his record in Australia and struggles, he's probably a pivotal part of the South African top order. And with him dismissed already, it's hard to see really where a lot of these runs are going to come from, or at least even where the resistance is going to come from. Certainly, Varane has shown that he's more than capable of it, but I think one of these batsmen in the top five need to stand up. Otherwise, there will be some selection issues when someone like Keegan Peterson comes back into the side.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Final thing that I thought I would mention, another strong crowd of 34,000 today. And actually that I saw just before that takes the total for the 3 days up to over 141,000, which is actually better than the 3 days of the Ashes last summer. So perhaps the sort of reports of the decline of attendance at all Australian cricket a bit exaggerated there, which is good to see. And yeah, good to see the Melburnians turned out well. The Melburnians that weren't just only Indians and Pakistanis turned out to some cricket. So yeah, good signs there. Well, thanks Ethan for coming on again. Thank you all for listening. We'll probably be back at, I don't know, hopefully we'll be able to do it at an early podcast at about 2 p.m. or something tomorrow if Australia wrap up South Africa quickly. But you never know, there could be a big resistance from Sarel Erva and Kaya Zondo. I'm backing Kaya Zondo, or Rassie van der Dussen, my pick to make a century. Could be hard when he's not in the team, but anyway, we'll see what happens. But for now, it's goodbye.